on Life and Times tonight.
How safe is our food from a terrorist attack? Tonight we'll hear more about the dangers and what's been done to keep America's food supply safe.
In the wake of September 11th, the word went out from the feds to food producers everywhere. Watch your crops and do what it takes to keep them safe.
Part of that we've been doing for a long time, but part of it came at the request of the FBI, who, through the CHP, asked us to just be on higher alert.
Also, how much are we willing to pay to feel safe? Los Angeles City Controller Laura Chick talks about the high cost of vigilance.
We're losing money in sales tax. We're losing money in transit occupancy tax from hotels. We're losing money in terms of property transfer tax because the real estate market and home sales are slowing. Times are tight.
Also, Pat Morrison says terrorism isn't the only thing on the government's mind these days.
The wish to live and the right to die, undone on orders from D.C. on tonight's Infinitely Morrison.
These stories coming up next on Life and Times tonight.
Life and Times tonight is made possible by the L.K. Whittier Foundation, which is dedicated to improving the quality of life by supporting innovative endeavors in the fields of medicine, health, science, and education.
Good evening, I'm Val Zavala.
And I'm Jess Marlowe. For weeks, the focus has been on anthrax and how the bacteria has been spread through the mail. But now, many experts are focusing on what could be the next target of terrorism, the nation's food supply.
Anthrax is fairly hard to come by, but a terrorist might contaminate huge amounts of produce or meat with something that's fairly common, such as salmonella, or even some kind of poison. As Gay reports, that very real threat has put the nation's food producers on high alert.
California's fertile land grows crops that help feed the nation. But worries over terrorism are now feeding fears about our food. Could it be the next target of terrorism if America's enemies find a way to poison what we eat? Not long after the September 11th attacks, Boskovich Farms in Ventura County got a visit from the California Highway Patrol.
We make sure that our spray equipment is kept under lock and key, and pesticides as well. And part of that we've been doing for a long time, but part of it came at the request of the FBI, who, through the CHP, asked us to just be on higher alert.
The family-owned farm is one of the biggest in Ventura County. 12,000 acres of green onions, parsley, cilantro, and radishes. Some of its food is packed and sent to supermarket produce aisles. The rest is cleaned and packaged for the ready-to-eat market. Boskovich Farms has a head start in food safety. The company hired an expert years ago and set up its own testing lab to ensure that its produce is clean and uncontaminated.
We take random products off the processing line.
Every day, random samples are taken from the plant and tested for bacteria like E. coli and chloroform. This machine acts as your stomach would, mixing and churning a sample, which is then tested on something called a petrofilm.
When the petrofilm is incubated for 24 hours, the next morning, if there is any bacteria present, they will show up as red dots. So we actually go through and count and see how many we have.
Too much bacteria could mean there's contamination on the equipment or from the field. Workers are instructed on proper hand washing before heading into the field, and sanitation stations must be clean and well stocked. Chlorine is used to kill any microorganisms in the rinse water. Levels are checked every day and recorded.
A very big part of the food safety program is documentation. Because if there's a food safety crisis, we want to be able to go back to the paperwork and say, this is what happened.
In many ways, agroterrorism is more frightening than the anthrax scare or even September 11th. People can always avoid flying or opening suspicious mail. People can't avoid food. We all have to eat.
American fields do have some natural protection. Millions of acres spread across the nation make it hard for a terrorist to have a major impact. And consumers can do a lot to protect themselves.
It's important for consumers to wash their fruits and vegetables properly. And wash with water, rub the fruits and vegetables when you're washing them. That would be one way to reduce the number of microorganisms on your produce.
Irradiation can also be used to sanitize food.
Unfortunately, it's extremely expensive, and a regular grower would not be able to afford an irradiation unit. But, as I said, has been around for decades, has been used in the space program to sterilize food for astronauts. So this is one very effective method that can be used to reduce harmful bacteria on produce.
In any event, Martinez regards the days since September 11th as a wake-up call for the food industry.
As an employee of a company that grows produce and as a mother, you know, we need to eat more fresh produce and have healthier diets, not be afraid to consume more.
That food meant to nourish could be used as a weapon to hurt and destroy. In Oxnard, Gay Yee for Life and Times.
A reminder, we're taking your calls tonight during our discussion with some people who have a lot to say about the safety of our food stuff. Bob Atkins is Chief Deputy in the Los Angeles County Department of Agriculture. Professor Rick Greenwood is an environmental scientist at UCLA. And James Herson is a columnist and talk show host in Orange County who believes food is a very likely target of terrorists. Let me ask Mr. Atkins, is the Agriculture Department anxious that terrorism might infect our food?
Well, it's a balance that we need to strike here between being appropriately cautious and not alarming the public unnecessarily. We have a number of things that are already in place which secure our food supply. There is already programs in place which govern pesticides, how they're applied, when they're applied, and the residues that are monitored on any foodstuffs. What you saw in the Boskovich Farms is not unique. Most packing houses have this kind of program where the produce is washed and cleaned before it is packed. And
well,
so
our food has been remarkably safe, generally speaking,
Absolutely.
but that you're discounting terrorism.
Yes, but where is the risk? Where is it going to be applied? For contaminating the food supply, it's going to be difficult to do in the food. You're going to have large equipment and access to highly toxic materials.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jim Herson, you believe that we are vulnerable? What scenario might you be thinking of?
Well, it's just the fact that, you know, our 24-hour news cycles are somewhat myopic, and so they focus in on an event after it occurs and focus in on the security that's necessary for that event. When there's hijacking, all we see is airline security. When there's anthrax in the mail, all we see on the cable shows is the post office. And if we look at the history of terrorism, they mix it up. And so any conceivable target is something that we should prudently look at. And the fact is, the General Accounting Office released a report on terrorism before September 11th, and they left out completely this area of agriculture, this area of food processing, distribution, and retailing. And it seems like an area that's been underemphasized, perhaps because it doesn't have the pizzazz. A lot of people don't perceive it as something that threatens human life, because we've heard about foot and mouth disease. For livestock, we've heard about some crop diseases, but in fact it does threaten human life, and moreover it has a serious potential threat on our economy.
Mr. Greenwood, do you agree with that?
Well, certainly there are risks, but one of the positive things is our food supply is very diverse. And so it comes from a myriad of sources. We have import foods, we have domestic food supplies, and so I think just that diversity by itself gives us some protection.
No central hub from which all food
exactly.
flows.
I mean, we have shown in the past that centralization of food supplies has caused problems, and we have that naturally because part of our food supply is already contaminated. So we're dealing with that. Chicken has salmonella, and we know that, but we have the advantage that we can cook things and kill the microorganisms.
We'll get into more about
that.
what individuals can do in a moment. We do have a question now coming in from Jay from Oxnard. Jay, you're on Life and Times.
Hi there. Yes, I'm Jay, and I'm a school teacher here in Oxnard, and my students are quite concerned about this topic. However, I do have a question for the panel. What symptoms could the public expect from the different types of poisonings, and what should we do if we experience these symptoms?
All right.
I could
What's the most
probably
likely?
take that. Well, many of the food-related organisms naturally are diarrheal disease, the salmonellas and the campylobacters. So that would be one thing. If it's deliberately added, it would depend on the microorganism. But most of the things that are consumed are gastrointestinal type organisms. Listeria is one that's been mentioned, and that can cause fever. So that's generally
Fever,
what we have.
stomach ache, diarrhea,
Vomiting, things like that. People have talked about weaponized botulism toxin, and that would obviously cause the muscle problems and diplopia, eye problems and things like that. But some of that's very theoretical.
Let's take another call, who's Jack from Studio City. Jack, you're on Life and Times.
Hi, good night. Good evening. How are you? What I'm wondering is, are we really helping the terrorists in all of this by just giving them targets that they can focus, themselves on and our greatest fears?
That's a very common question. Every time we say, oh, look, we're vulnerable here, we're loaded there, people say, you're giving them ideas. Don't do that. Are we?
I think that that kind of thinking isn't appropriate. We're a nation at war. We're dealing with an organization that's highly sophisticated. They've been at this for a very long time. And in our own nation, they've embedded our nation with these cells. We know that they were able to plan a very intricate plan on September 11th. And so what we need to do is deputize American citizens. We have 280 million Americans. Government can't possibly do it all. And so the idea of getting information out to the public, I think, is a very positive idea.
But his question is, are we giving terrorist ideas by pointing out these particular targets?
I don't think so. I think
you're
the
saying
terrorists
they would
have
think of them themselves.
the exact same sort of unholy triangle that existed in the investigation into anthrax, finding out that anthrax research took place in the United States, the Soviet Union, and Iraq, also exists in this area. There's been research, there's a long history of this kind of agri-terrorism in the United States, in the Soviet Union, and in Iraq. The terrorists are very well aware of this. There's even reports or suggestions that some of the diseases that have occurred in Europe may be the product of terrorism. This is, of course, unproven. It's just theories.
Well, there were some people on learning that anthrax naturally occurs even in the soil of California. We're concerned about eating fresh vegetables from California.
Yeah, and that, I think, is one of the real problems that we face here is, I think, much more real than actual injury from these terrorist acts is undermining the confidence of our food supply, which can hurt us in the long term economically and actually have health effects because people would not eat fresh fruits and foods.
Here's another question from Van in Anza, which is near Palm Springs. Van, you're on Life and Times.
Yeah, I was wondering, we have pretty relatively good quality control out here, but what about the food that's imported? They don't stand up to our strict standards. I mean, what's the danger of sneaking in over the border?
Good question.
There are already measures in place to sample the produce. USDA monitors for agricultural organisms, and FDA is at Otay Mesa. I just visited there, and they have stepped up their efforts to monitor the food supply.
As strict or more strict than the monitoring of domestically produced products?
It is very similar to what we do here. The attempt is to find the same levels and assure the food quality and healthfulness wherever
Are
it's
you
from.
fairly confident?
Yes, and well, the other thing is that many of the organizations like U.S. Food and Drug have people overseas monitoring places and have actually set up quality control systems overseas rather than have things come here and then get rejected. They've worked with them to bring them up to our standards. So there's a lot more of that in place than I think people realize.
Right. Okay, we have a question now from Terry from Redondo Beach. Terry?
Hi, I have a question. I have a concern about the crop pickers. Indeed, is it possible that they could be encouraged to spread some kind of disaster on the crops while they're picking?
Well, first of all, they'd have to have access to any sort of an agent that would be out of the ordinary, something that would create a unique problem that we're not already dealing with. As Rick has mentioned earlier, there are a lot of the things we already do, the sanitation, cooking, and those things. The way we handle and process our products already eliminate a lot of these disease types or organisms, and we have measures in place to monitor any sort of chemical contamination.
I would be more concerned about the workers that work with livestock than with the crops because of the kinds of diseases that can be introduced to livestock, and our livestock is held in large quantities close together. They tend to be very much related, and we haven't had some of these diseases that are happening in Europe introduced yet. And so that would be a great concern. And we do have some workers and great turnover even in that industry, also in the meat processing industry. So I think those are of a concern.
Professor Greenwood, are feedlots a major concern?
Well, they've always been a concern. Whenever you take any group of animals and put them together, you have the potential for disease, and so they are monitored closely. I think we have to separate actions against our feedstock versus actions against individuals, and so it's terrorism in both instances, but certainly the economic chaos that would be caused by infecting our feed crops would be tremendous.
In our last 30 seconds, what are the most important things people can do at home to make sure their food is safe?
Well, I think we can all answer that. One of the first things is to wash their hands, and then
wash their hands.
Wash their hands before they handle and after they handle food, because our meats have, from time to time, E. coli 0157. They have Campylobacter and Salmonella, so that's important. Cooking temperatures are very important.
Pay close attention.
And being aware of food, and not buying things where the cans are partially open or the jars are undone, and obviously common sense that seems to work very well.
Heightened awareness.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Bob Atkins with the LA County Department of Agriculture, Dr. Rick Greenwood of UCLA, and James Herson, commentator from Orange County. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tomorrow on Life and Times, we'll look at a new plan that could make life easier for thousands of undocumented workers in Southern California. It's an effort to give them valid ID cards, but critics say it's wrong and possibly illegal. That's Friday at 7 o'clock on Life and Times.